It was just another Tuesday afternoon at one of the busiest airports in the country, crowded, loud, and moving at a pace that left little room for patience. Travelers rushed in every direction, dragging suitcases, balancing coffee cups, and shouting last-minute goodbyes over the hum of rolling carts and overhead announcements. Amid all that chaos, a young woman stood near Gate B12, calm and unassuming, scrolling through her phone like any other college student, killing time before a flight. She wore jeans, a soft gray hoodie, and white sneakers, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder. To anyone glancing her way, she looked like just another passenger waiting for her plane, and in a lot of ways she was. She had a boarding pass, a valid ID, and a destination in mind. But what no one around her knew, and what the gate agent certainly didn't believe, was that she was Sasha Obama, daughter of the 44th President of the United States. Sasha had been flying more on her own lately. Now in her early 20s and finishing up college, she'd started pushing for a little more independence. Her parents, protective but understanding, had agreed, on the condition that she check in regularly and stick to certain safety guidelines. Today was one of those solo trips, a quick hop from the East Coast to visit a friend out west. She'd flown commercial before, always low-key, always blending in. She liked it that way. It felt normal. And after growing up in the White House, normal was something she cherished. She'd checked in without issue, breezed through security, thanks to a discreet but efficient coordination with TSA, and found her gate with plenty of time to spare. She bought a bottle of water, texted her dad to say she'd landed safely, and settled into a seat near the window. The sun streamed through the glass, warming the tile floor, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. But peace doesn't last long in an airport. About 20 minutes before boarding, a gate agent, a woman in her 40s with a tight bun and a no-nonsense expression, approached her. "Excuse me," she said, voice clipped. "This area is for ticketed passengers only." Sasha looked up, confused. "I am," she said, holding up her boarding pass. "I'm on the 3:15 to Denver." The agent barely glanced at it. "You need to stay behind the line until boarding begins," she said, pointing to a taped-off zone 10 feet away. "I'm not blocking anything," Sasha replied gently. "I'm just sitting here." A few nearby passengers turned their heads. The agent's tone sharpened. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move now." Sasha stood, not wanting to cause a scene. She stepped back to the designated waiting area, tucking her phone into her pocket. She figured it was just standard procedure. Maybe the agent was having a rough day. No big deal. But then 5 minutes later, the same agent returned, this time with a colleague. They spoke in hushed tones, eyes flicking toward Sasha like she was a problem that needed solving. "Can I help you?" Sasha asked, keeping her voice even. The second agent, a man with a radio clipped to his belt, stepped forward. "We need to see your ID." She handed it over without hesitation. He studied it, then looked at her, then back at the card. His brow furrowed. "This says Sasha Obama," he said slowly, as if reading the name for the first time. "Yes," she said. He exchanged a glance with the woman. "And you're related to?" "My dad's Barack Obama," she said simply, like she had 1,000 times before, sometimes with pride, sometimes with weary resignation. The agents didn't laugh, but their expressions shifted. Not to belief, but to suspicion. "Right," the man said, handing back the ID. "Look, miss, we get people saying all kinds of things. You can't just sit up there claiming to be someone you're not." "I'm not claiming anything," Sasha said, her calm starting to fray at the edges. "That's my name. That's my ID. I just want to board my flight." "We're going to need you to come with us," the woman said firmly. "Why?" Sasha asked, genuinely baffled. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You're causing a disturbance," the man said, though no one around them seemed disturbed at all. In fact, a few passengers were now watching with concern. "I'm sitting quietly," she said. "You're the ones making a scene. That did it." The agent's posture stiffened. One of them tapped their radio. "We need security at gate B12. Possible unauthorized person in secure area." Within minutes, 2 uniformed security officers arrived. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check her boarding pass again. They simply flanked her and said, "Please come with us." Sasha hesitated. She knew resisting would only make things worse. So she walked with them, Heart pounding, past rows of staring travelers, past families with wide-eyed kids, past business people pretending not to look. She kept her head high, but inside, she felt a mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. How could this be happening? They led her through a side door, away from the main terminal into a narrow hallway with flickering fluorescent lights. There they asked her to wait while they verified her identity. She asked to call someone, her detail, her dad, anyone, but they said phones weren't allowed in that area. When she insisted, they relented just enough to let her use a landline. But the number she dialed went straight to voicemail. Her phone, still in her backpack, was nearly dead. Back in the main terminal, whispers began to spread. "Did you see that girl? She said she was Obama's daughter." "Yeah, right, like they'd let her fly alone. She got hauled off like she was trouble." No one stepped in. No one questioned it. After all, airport staff must know what they're doing, right? Meanwhile, Sasha sat on a hard plastic chair in a cramped office, arms crossed, trying to stay composed. She thought about how many times her family had talked about this exact thing, how, even years after leaving the White House, they still faced skepticism, extra scrutiny, or outright disbelief simply because of who they were. Her mom had once been mistaken for a flight attendant. Her dad had been asked to show ID at a hotel where he was the guest of honor. It wasn't new, but it never got easier. Outside, the boarding announcement for her flight began. Passengers lined up. The plane would leave without her. She took a deep breath. She wasn't scared. She'd been trained for situations like this, but she was frustrated. Not just at the agents, but at the system that let assumptions override basic respect. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't lied. She'd shown her ID, stayed polite, and followed instructions. And still, she was treated like a threat. What she didn't know yet was that her dad had just landed, at the same airport. He'd surprised her with a plan to pick her up, himself, just father and daughter grabbing dinner before she flew out. He'd texted her an hour ago, "Running a few minutes behind, but I'll be there before you board." She hadn't seen the message. Her phone was off, battery drained. And Barack Obama, former president, Nobel laureate, one of the most recognizable faces on Earth, was walking through the terminal right now. Sunglasses on, cap pulled low but still turning heads. He spotted gate B12. He didn't see his daughter waiting. Instead, he saw a tense cluster of staff, a delayed boarding process, and a growing sense that something was very wrong. He quickened his pace. Back in the office, Sasha heard footsteps approaching. She stood up, ready to try again. But before she could speak, the door opened, and there he was, her dad. His expression wasn't angry. It was something quieter, deeper, disappointment mixed with protectiveness. He looked at her first. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, relief flooding through her. "Yeah, just weird afternoon." Then he turned to the agents who had just entered behind him, faces pale, radios silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "You really didn't believe her?" And in that moment, the entire weight of what they'd done crashed down on them. Not because of who he was, but because of how they'd treated someone who'd done nothing but tell the truth. But that part, that was still to come. For now, in that sterile hallway, Sasha just wanted to go home. Or at least grab a burger with her dad before her next flight. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of things everyone deserves, no matter their last name. The moment Sasha stepped out of that cramped office with her dad beside her, the air in the terminal seemed to shift. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms blared, no crowds gasped, but something subtle had changed. People who'd been scrolling on their phones or shuffling toward gates slowed down. A few did a double take. One older man in a baseball cap actually whispered, "Is that?" before his wife tugged his sleeve and shook her head like she was trying to snap him out of it. Sasha kept her eyes forward, not wanting to draw more attention. She just wanted to get back to her gate, board her flight, and pretend this never happened. But her dad, calm, steady, the kind of person who made chaos feel manageable, placed a light hand on her shoulder. "Let's sort this out first," he said quietly. Back at gate B12, things were unraveling fast. The boarding process had stalled. Passengers were grumbling. A flight attendant stood near the jet bridge, arms crossed, checking her watch every few seconds. The original gate agents, the woman with the tight bun and the man with the radio, were now huddled near the counter, speaking in urgent whispers. They'd just been told by a supervisor that a high-profile individual was on site and heading their way. They didn't know who it was, but the tone in the supervisor's voice told them it wasn't good. Then they saw him. Barack Obama didn't stride in like a movie star. He walked like a dad who just found out his kid got treated unfairly and was now here to fix it. No entourage, no shouting, just presence, and that was enough. The male agent's face went white. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she straightened a stack of boarding passes that didn't need straightening. Neither of them moved to greet him. They just stood there, frozen in the kind of dread that comes when you realize you've made a mistake you can't undo. Sasha's dad didn't go straight to them. First, he turned to his daughter. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again, voice low. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice cracked just a little. "Just embarrassed." "You didn't do anything wrong," he said firmly. "Don't carry that." Then he walked over to the gate counter. The agents braced themselves. "Hi," he said, polite but direct. "I'm Barack Obama. That's my daughter, Sasha. She was removed from this gate earlier even though she had a valid ticket and ID. I'd like to understand why." The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. The man cleared his throat. "Sir, we didn't recognize her," he stammered. "We thought there was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Barack repeated, not as a question but as a statement hanging in the air. "She showed you her ID, she told you who she was, and instead of verifying it, maybe calling someone, checking a database, or even just giving her the benefit of the doubt, you escorted her out like she was a security risk." "We follow protocol," the woman said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. "Protocol shouldn't mean ignoring common sense," he replied, "or basic decency." A supervisor finally rushed over, a man in a navy blazer. With a name tag that read D. Reynolds, he'd been monitoring the situation from the operations office and had just gotten off the phone with corporate security. His face was slick with sweat, and he kept adjusting his glasses like they wouldn't stay put. "Mr. Obama," he said, extending a hand, then pulling it back when he realized it might seem too casual. "We are so sorry for this unfortunate incident. We're looking into it immediately." Barack didn't shake his hand. "I appreciate the apology," he said, "but my concern isn't just about inconvenience. It's about how people are treated when they don't fit someone's expectation of who they should be." Reynolds nodded rapidly. "Absolutely. We take this very seriously. We'll be reviewing our training procedures." "Good." Barack cut in gently but firmly, "because this isn't just about my daughter. Tomorrow it could be a veteran in a wheelchair, or a student with an accent, or someone who just looks out of place to someone having a bad day. That's how bias works. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in small decisions." Reynolds swallowed hard. He knew the man was right. And worse, he knew the whole exchange was probably being recorded by half a dozen phones in the terminal. Meanwhile, Sasha had stepped aside, leaning against a pillar near the restrooms. She watched the scene unfold with a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. She'd seen her dad like this before, not angry but unwavering. The kind of calm that made people rethink everything they thought they knew. A young woman nearby, maybe a college student herself, caught Sasha's eye and gave her a small, sympathetic smile. Sasha returned it. In that moment, she felt seen, not as the president's daughter, but as a person who'd just been through something unfair. That tiny human connection meant more than any apology from management. Back at the gate, Reynolds was now offering to rebook Sasha on the next available flight. Upgrade her to first class, provide meal vouchers, anything to make it right. But Sasha shook her head when her dad relayed the offer. "I just want to get on my original flight," she said, "if it's not too late." It wasn't. The plane was still at the gate. The captain had been briefed by air traffic control about the delay and was willing to hold for a few more minutes, especially once he heard who was involved. Within 10 minutes, Sasha was back in the secure area, this time with her dad walking her to the jet bridge. Passengers on the plane watched through the windows as she approached. Some recognized her. Others just saw a young woman who'd been through a rough patch and was now moving forward with quiet dignity. As she handed her boarding pass to the flight attendant, the woman gave her a warm, knowing look. "Welcome aboard," she said softly. "We've been waiting for you," Sasha smiled. "Thanks for holding the door." Her dad waited until she was safely on the plane before stepping back. He didn't wave or make a show of it. He just stood there for a moment watching the aircraft, then turned and walked away, back through the terminal, past the now silent gate agents, past the curious onlookers, back to his car. But the story didn't end there. In the operations office, Reynolds called an emergency staff huddle. Not to assign blame, he said, but to learn. He gathered the gate team, the security officers, even the customer service reps who'd overheard the commotion. He played the audio from the gate's internal mic. Just snippets, but enough to hear Sasha's calm voice, the agent's sharp tones, the growing tension. Listen to how she spoke, Reynolds said. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't lying. She was patient, and we failed her. One of the younger agents, a guy who'd only been on the job for 6 months, spoke up. But how are we supposed to know? Anyone can say they're someone famous. That's fair, Reynolds said. But anyone doesn't usually have a government-issued ID that matches their claim. And even if they did lie, what's the harm in double-checking before you treat someone like a threat? A quick call to corporate security takes 30 seconds. Escalating without verification? That takes a lot longer to fix. The room fell quiet. No one defended the decision. They all knew they'd let assumptions override procedure. Later that evening, after the last flight had departed, the 2 gate agents stayed behind. They didn't talk much. They just sat in the break room sipping bad coffee, replaying the afternoon in their heads. The woman finally said, "I keep thinking, what if it had been my daughter? Would I want her treated like that just because someone didn't believe her?" The man nodded. "Yeah, and the worst part? She never even got mad, she just took it." That stuck with them, because anger they could have dismissed as drama. But grace under pressure? That was harder to ignore. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Sasha landed safely at her destination. Her friend picked her up at the airport, and over greasy diner food and milkshakes she told the whole story. Her friend laughed at first, "No way, they didn't recognize you," but then grew quiet when she heard how it really went down. "You handled that like a pro," her friend said. "I just wanted to be believed," Sasha replied. Is that so much to ask? Back in Washington, her mom called. She'd heard from her husband. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, voice thick with concern. "I'm fine, Mom," Sasha said. "Really, it's just weird how people see you or don't see you based on what they expect." Her mom sighed. "That's a lesson we've all had to learn. But you didn't let it shrink you. That's what matters." That night, as Sasha lay in bed in her friend's guest room, she thought about the agents. She didn't hate them. She didn't want them fired. She just hoped they'd think twice next time, about who they assume, who they trust, and who they dismiss without really looking. Because in the end, it wasn't about fame or power. It was about being treated like a human being. And that's something everyone deserves, whether you're flying coach or used to live in the White House. The airport staff didn't know it yet. But this incident would ripple through their department for months. Training modules would be updated. Role-playing scenarios would include situations about implicit bias. Supervisors would remind teams, when in doubt, verify, don't assume. And though no headlines were written, no viral videos posted, something real had shifted. Not because of who Sasha was, but because of how she carried herself, and how her father chose to respond, not with outrage, but with clarity, in a world that often rewards noise. Sometimes the quietest moments teach the loudest lessons. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky when the call came through to the airport's main operations center. It wasn't a loud alarm or a flashing alert, just a quiet, urgent message routed through secure channels. Former President Obama is en route to Terminal C. ETA, 12 minutes. His daughter was removed from Gate B12 earlier this afternoon. Expect him to request a debrief on site. The words landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spread fast. Inside the security coordination room, a dimly lit space tucked behind baggage claim, radios crackled to life. Supervisors who'd just wrapped up their afternoon meetings were pulled back in. Security leads double-checked protocols they hadn't reviewed in years. Someone ran to the break room to refill the coffee pot, hands shaking just slightly. It wasn't fear of punishment exactly. It was the weight of knowing you'd mishandled something that couldn't be undone. And now the person most affected was walking through your front door. What made it worse was that no one had planned for this. The airport had procedures for visiting dignitaries, yes, advance notices, motorcade routes, secure holding areas. But this wasn't a scheduled state visit. This was personal. And personal meant unpredictable. Out on the tarmac, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled through the service gate, bypassing the usual checkpoints thanks to a quick nod from a Secret Service agent already stationed near the private arrival zone. The former president wasn't traveling with a full detail, just 2 agents who'd been on his protection team for years, men who moved like shadows but spoke only when necessary. They knew the drill. Stay close, stay quiet, let him handle things his way. He stepped out of the vehicle wearing the same cap and sunglasses from earlier, but now there was a different energy around him. Not anger, not even frustration, just focus. Like a teacher walking into a classroom after hearing a student was bullied, not to scold, but to understand. As he moved through the employee corridors toward the main terminal, staff who recognized him froze mid-step. A janitor paused with his mop. A baggage handler stopped wheeling a cart. No one spoke. They just watched him pass, as if his presence alone reset the air pressure in the building. Inside the terminal, gate B12 was eerily quiet. Boarding had long since finished. The area had been cleaned, chairs reset, the usual bustle replaced by an awkward stillness. The original gate agents had been quietly reassigned to administrative duties for the rest of the shift. Standard procedure when an incident escalates beyond customer service. But they hadn't left. They stood near the staff break room, arms crossed, eyes down, waiting. They didn't have to wait long. Barack Obama didn't head straight to them. First, he found the duty manager, the same man in the navy blazer, Reynolds, who'd already drafted 3 versions of an apology email and deleted them all. He was pacing near the information desk when he saw the former president approaching. "Sir," Reynolds said, voice tight but steady. "Thank you for coming. We've launched an internal review. I'm not here for a report," Barack said gently. "I'm here because my daughter was treated like she didn't belong. And I want to know how that happened in a place that's supposed to welcome people." Reynolds nodded. "We failed. There's no excuse." "Good," Barack said. "Now let's talk about how to make sure it doesn't happen again." What followed wasn't a confrontation. It was a conversation. They walked slowly toward a quiet conference room near the operations wing. Just the 2 of them, no cameras, no recorders, no audience. Inside, Barack took off his cap and sat at the table like he was at a PTA meeting. Not a crisis debrief. "Tell me what your team saw when she walked up," he asked. Reynolds hesitated, then spoke honestly. She looked young, alone. Not what they expected someone in that secure area to look like without an escort. They assumed she was lost. Or worse. Worse. Barack raised an eyebrow. "There's a lot of anxiety these days," Reynolds admitted. "People try to sneak into secure zones. Fake IDs, scams. The staff are trained to be alert." "But alert doesn't mean dismissive," Barack said. "Being alert means paying attention, not jumping to conclusions." She showed ID, she gave her name. Instead of verifying, they chose disbelief. That's not security. That's bias wearing a uniform. Reynolds didn't argue. He knew it was true. Back in the main terminal, word had spread among the frontline staff. A group of customer service reps huddled near the employee entrance, whispering. One of them, a woman who'd worked at the airport for over a decade, said quietly, "I saw her sitting there. She wasn't causing trouble. She was just waiting, like any of us would," another nodded. "And they treated her like she was trying to pull a fast one. Like she owed them proof just to exist in that space." It was that word, exist, that stuck with people. Because that's what it came down to. Not fame, not privilege, just the right to be where you're supposed to be without having to justify your presence. Meanwhile, in the conference room, the conversation shifted from blame to solutions. Barack asked about training, about how often staff reviewed scenarios involving implicit bias, about whether they practiced de-escalation or just enforcement. "We do annual sensitivity training," Reynolds said, "but it's mostly online modules, click-through stuff." "That's part of the problem," Barack said. "You can't learn humanity from a checklist. You have to practice it. Role-play it. Feel what it's like to be on the other side." He told a story about a time years ago when he was a young lawyer flying home after a long case. He'd dressed casually, carried a worn briefcase, and been asked 3 times to show his boarding pass after already clearing security. Each time the agent's tone grew sharper, as if his very presence was suspicious. He never made a scene. He just complied. But he remembered how it felt, like he had to earn the right to be there while others walked through unquestioned. "That's the thing," he said, leaning forward. "It's not about one bad day. It's about patterns, and patterns become culture." Reynolds took notes, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Outside, the evening shift was starting. New agents arrived, unaware of the day's drama. But the mood had shifted. The usual pre-shift chatter was quieter. There was a sense that something important had happened, and that it mattered. One of the security officers who'd escorted Sasha earlier sat alone in the locker room, staring at his badge. He thought about how he'd barely looked at her face, just her clothes, her posture, the way she held herself. He'd assumed she was playing dress-up, as if being the daughter of a former president was a costume anyone could wear. But now he realized she hadn't been performing. She'd just been herself, and that should have been enough. Back in the conference room, Barack stood to leave. "I'm not asking for punishment," he said. "I'm asking for reflection, for change. My daughter doesn't need special treatment. She just needs to be treated like anyone else, with respect." Reynolds walked him out. As they passed gate B12, now empty and dimly lit, Barack paused for just a second. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. By the time he reached his car, the sun had set. The terminal lights glowed against the darkening sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Sasha. "Made it. Thanks for coming." He smiled and typed back, "Always." But the real work was just beginning, not for him, but for the people inside that airport. That night, Reynolds stayed late. He called a meeting for the next morning, mandatory for all customer-facing staff. Not a lecture, a listening session. He wanted to hear from the team what scared them, what confused them, where did they feel unprepared. He also reached out to corporate headquarters not to cover anything up, but to ask for real resources, live trainers, not just videos, scenarios based on real incidents, not hypotheticals. And he requested that Sasha's case, anonymous of course, be used as a teaching moment in the next round of training. Some managers pushed back. "It's one incident," they said. "Don't make it bigger than it is." But Reynolds stood firm. It's not about one incident. It's about what that incident reveals. The next day, during the morning huddle, he didn't mention names. He just said, "Yesterday, a young woman with valid credentials was removed from a gate because she didn't look like she belonged. She was polite. She was truthful. And she was still treated like a problem. If that can happen to her, it can happen to anyone who doesn't fit someone's mental picture of normal. And that's on us to fix." No one argued. In the weeks that followed, small changes started to appear. Role-playing exercises included scenarios where passengers looked out of place: a teen in a hoodie, an elderly man with a foreign accent, a woman traveling alone with no luggage. Staff were taught to ask open-ended questions. "Can you tell me more about your travel plans?" Instead of, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" One of the gate agents, the woman with the tight bun, signed up for an extra workshop on unconscious bias. She didn't do it for credit. She did it because she kept seeing Sasha's face in her mind, calm, confused, but never angry. And she realized that the real test of professionalism isn't how you handle chaos. It's how you treat someone when they're just trying to get home. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, life went on. Sasha returned to her routine: classes, coffee runs, late-night study sessions. She didn't post about what happened. She didn't give interviews. But when a friend asked if she was mad, she just said, "I'm more sad that it still surprises people when someone like me flies alone." Her dad, for his part, never mentioned the incident publicly. But in a quiet speech at a leadership conference months later, he said something that sounded familiar to anyone who'd been paying attention. "Dignity isn't earned, it's given. And the moment we start making people prove they deserve it, we've already lost our way." Back at the airport, the staff didn't become perfect overnight, but they became more thoughtful, more aware. And sometimes that's enough, because real change doesn't always come with headlines. Sometimes it starts with a single moment of regret and the courage to do better next time. The morning after the incident, the airport felt different, not in any way a passenger would notice, but in the quiet hum of its inner workings. There were no signs posted, No public announcements, but among the staff, something had shifted. Conversations in the break room were lower, more thoughtful. Supervisors paused longer before reacting to minor disruptions. Even the way gate agents greeted passengers sounded softer, less automatic. But for the two who'd been at the center of it all, the woman with the tight bun and the man who'd questioned Sasha's ID, the weight hadn't lifted. They'd spent a sleepless night replaying every word, every glance, every assumption they'd made. They weren't bad people. They'd just followed what they thought was protocol, filtered through years of training that emphasized vigilance over empathy. Now they saw how that vigilance had turned into something else entirely, suspicion without cause. By mid-morning, they were called into the operations office. Not for discipline, as they'd feared, but for a different kind of meeting. Reynolds sat at the head of the table, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman from corporate training, someone they'd never seen before, with kind eyes and a calm presence. She introduced herself as part of a new human-centered response pilot program, rolled out quietly after high-profile customer service failures at other hubs. "We're not here to reprimand," she said gently. "We're here to understand what happened, and how we can help you feel more confident next time." The man exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. I didn't know what to do," he admitted. She said who she was, but it sounded so unlikely. I mean, why would she be there alone? No security? No handler? Because she wanted to be normal, the trainer said. And normal doesn't always look the way we expect. The woman with the bun finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I kept thinking, if she really was who she said she was, wouldn't someone have told us? Wouldn't there be a heads up?" "That's the trap," the trainer replied. "We assume that important people come with fanfare. But dignity doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it walks in quietly, with a backpack and a boarding pass." They talked for over an hour, about bias, about fear, about the pressure of making split-second decisions in high-stress environments. The trainer didn't shame them. Instead, she gave them tools, phrases to use when uncertain. "Let me verify that for you." Questions to ask instead of accusations. "Can you help me understand?" And permission to pause, to take 30 seconds to call a supervisor rather than act on instinct. After the meeting, they walked back to their stations in silence. But it wasn't the heavy silence of shame anymore. It was the quiet of clarity. Meanwhile, news of the incident, though never officially confirmed, had begun to ripple beyond the airport. A passenger who'd witnessed part of the scene posted a vague but compelling thread on social media. "Saw a young black woman get escorted out of a gate today for no reason. She was calm, showed ID, but staff wouldn't listen. Later, a very familiar face showed up, and the staff turned pale." The post didn't name names, but it didn't need to. People connected the dots. Comments poured in, some angry, some skeptical, but many sharing their own stories of being questioned, removed, or disbelieved simply for not fitting a mold. The airport's social media team monitored the chatter closely. They prepared a statement, but Reynolds held it back. "If we respond too fast," he told his team, "it'll look like damage control. Let's show change first, then speak." And change was already happening. That afternoon, a new training module was rolled out to all frontline staff, not as a punishment, but as a refresher. It included a short video featuring real employees sharing moments when they'd misjudged someone. One agent talked about assuming an elderly man was confused when he was actually hard of hearing. Another admitted to doubting a young mother's ticket because she looked too young to travel alone. The message was clear. Assumptions hurt. Verification helps. The video ended with a simple line. "When in doubt, choose kindness first. Protocol second." Back in Washington, Sasha's parents sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, talking quietly. Her mom had read the social media posts. "People are angry," she said. "They should be," her dad replied. "But I hope they're also hopeful. Because real change starts when people admit they got it wrong and try to do better." He wasn't speaking just about the airport. He was speaking about the country, about the world, about how hard it is to see someone fully when you're looking through the lens of your own expectations. A few days later, Sasha called her dad. "You know," she said, "I keep thinking about those agents. I hope they're okay," he smiled. "That's the thing about you. You worry about the people who hurt you." "I don't think they meant to," she said. They were just stuck in their own story. And maybe that was the real lesson, not just for them, but for everyone. At the airport, the two agents were given a choice: return to gate duty with extra support, or shadow the customer experience team for a week to see things from the other side. They chose the latter. For 5 days, they walked the terminals not as enforcers, but as observers. They watched families struggle with strollers, veterans navigate confusing signage, non-English speakers fumble with kiosks. They saw how easily frustration could build, not from malice, but from systems that weren't built with real people in mind. On the 4th day, the woman with the bun helped an older woman find her gate after she'd gotten turned around. The older woman thanked her with tears in her eyes. "You're the first person who didn't rush me," she said. That moment stayed with her. By the end of the week, both agents asked to return to their posts, but with a new approach. They started greeting every passenger by name if it was on the boarding pass. They made eye contact. They said please and thank you even during rush hour. Small things, human things, passengers noticed. Not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle shift of a tense interaction turning warm, of a confused traveler leaving with a smile instead of a sigh. One afternoon, a teenager approached the gate, hoodie, headphones, alone. The man who'd once questioned Sasha saw him and felt that old instinct rise. Is he supposed to be here? But this time he paused. He took a breath. Then he smiled and said, "Heading to Denver?" The kid nodded, surprised. "Yeah, nice city," the agent said. "Boarding starts in 10. You're all set. No suspicion, no escort, just acknowledgement." The kid gave a small nod and sat down, and in that moment the agent felt something lift, a weight he hadn't realized he was still carrying. Weeks passed. The story faded from social media. No news outlets picked it up, partly because no official statement was made and partly because the Obamas chose not to make it a spectacle. But within the airport it became a quiet benchmark. New hires were told, "Remember Gate B12, not as a warning, but as a reminder, people are more than what they appear to be." Reynolds began including a dignity check in weekly staff meetings, asking teams to share one moment when they chose patience over protocol or empathy over assumption. At first, responses were stiff, but over time, stories poured in. The agent who stayed late to help a lost child, the supervisor who rebooked a stranded passenger without being asked, the security officer who knelt to talk to a scared dog instead of treating it as a hazard. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes still happened. But the culture was shifting from control to connection. And then one ordinary Tuesday, Sasha returned to the same airport. She wasn't flying this time. She was meeting a friend for lunch before a museum visit. She walked through the terminal like any other visitor, hoodie, backpack, no fanfare. She didn't expect to be recognized. She didn't want to be. But as she passed gate B12, she saw the woman with the tight bun, hair now looser, expression softer, standing at the counter. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the agent stepped forward. Not with a clipboard or a radio, just with quiet courage. "I don't know if you remember me," she said, voice steady but gentle, "but I owe you an apology. What happened that day? It wasn't right. And I'm working every day to make sure it never happens again." Sasha looked at her, not with anger, not with pity, but with something deeper. Understanding. "I remember," she said. "And I appreciate you saying that." They stood there for a moment, two people bound by a mistake and a choice to do better. Then Sasha smiled. "Have a good day." "You too," the agent said, and meant it. As Sasha walked away, she felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because she'd been proven right, but because someone had chosen to grow. Back at the gate, the agent took a deep breath and turned back to her work. She didn't tell her coworkers what had just happened. She didn't need to. The change was already in her actions, and sometimes that's how real healing begins. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet words, honest eyes, and the courage to say, "I was wrong." In a world that often rewards certainty, the bravest thing you can do is admit you didn't see clearly and then try again. This time with your heart open. Months passed, and the airport settled into a new rhythm. The incident at Gate B12 never made the news. There were no press conferences, no viral clips, no dramatic headlines. To the outside world, it was as if it never happened. But inside the terminals, In the quiet corners where staff gathered between shifts and in the way passengers were greeted at the gate, something real had taken root. The two agents who'd been at the center of it all didn't become overnight heroes. They didn't get promoted or publicly praised. But they changed. Not in flashy ways, but in the small, steady choices that define character. They listened more. They paused before reacting. They asked questions instead of making assumptions. And slowly the people around them began to do the same. One afternoon, during a routine training session, a new hire raised her hand. "What do you do?" she asked, "when someone says something that sounds impossible? Like, what if someone claims they're someone famous? Do you just take their word for it?" The trainer, a woman who joined the team after the Gate B12 incident, smiled. "You don't have to believe them right away," she said. "But you also don't have to disbelieve them to do your job. Verification isn't about doubt. It's about respect. You say, 'Let me check that for you,' and then you do. That's all." It sounded simple, and maybe it was. But simplicity often hides the hardest truth. Treating people well doesn't require special tools. It just requires seeing them. Meanwhile, Sasha had gone back to her life. Classes, friends, late-night walks through campus. She didn't talk about what happened at the airport unless someone asked. And even then she kept it brief. It was awkward, she'd say, but it worked out. What she didn't say, what she didn't need to say, was how much it had reminded her of something her parents had taught her since she was little. That dignity isn't something you earn by proving who you are. It's something you're owed just by being human. Her dad, for his part, never brought it up in public speeches or interviews. But months later, during a quiet conversation at a community event, someone asked him how he stayed so calm in the face of injustice. He thought for a moment, then said, "I've learned that anger doesn't always fix things. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up and ask people to be better, not because they owe you, but because we all deserve that from each other." It wasn't a quote meant for headlines. But it spread anyway, passed from teacher to student, from nurse to patient, from one airport employee to another. Back at the terminal, Reynolds had quietly submitted a proposal to corporate leadership, a new training track focused entirely on human-centered service. Not just for gate agents, but for security, baggage handlers, even maintenance crews. "Every person who works here shapes someone's travel experience," he wrote. "Let's make sure it's shaped with care." To his surprise, the proposal was approved. Within 6 months, the program launched at 3 major hubs with plans to expand nationwide. It included real stories, anonymous but real, about moments when a kind word changed a traveler's day, or when an assumption caused unnecessary pain. There were role plays, group discussions, even guest speakers from advocacy groups who talked about what it feels like to move through public spaces while being constantly questioned. One of the most powerful sessions involved a simple exercise. Staff were asked to walk through the terminal wearing noise-canceling headphones and blurred glasses, simulating what it's like for someone with sensory or vision challenges. Many came out shaken. "I felt invisible," one agent admitted. "Like no one saw me as a person, just as a problem to manage." That was the point. Change didn't happen overnight. There were still bad days, rushed decisions, moments of tension. But the culture had shifted enough that people now felt safe speaking up when something felt off. A supervisor once stopped a colleague from questioning a young traveler just because he looked nervous. "Let's find out why he's nervous," she said, "before we decide he's a threat," and that made all the difference. As for Sasha, she flew again several times, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. She never asked for special treatment. She just showed up like anyone else, and each time she noticed little things. A gate agent who smiled when checking her pass, a security officer who said, "Have a good trip," instead of just waving her through, a flight attendant who remembered her drink order from a previous flight. None of it was about who her father was. It was about who she was, and the fact that she was being seen. One evening over dinner with her parents, she mentioned how different air travel felt now. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it feels and lighter. Like people are trying." Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's because you gave them a chance to." Her dad nodded. "Most people want to do the right thing. They just need a reason to look closer." And maybe that was the real legacy of that strange afternoon at the airport. Not the mistake, but the response. Not the removal, but the return. Not the regret, but the resolve to grow. Years later, A documentary filmmaker working on a series about everyday courage interviewed a retired airport supervisor. When asked about the most impactful moment of his career, he didn't talk about storms, system failures, or even major security scares. He talked about a quiet Tuesday, a young woman in a hoodie, and the day his team learned that respect costs nothing, but means everything. He never named names. He didn't need to. The story stood on its own. In classrooms, the incident became a case study in ethics courses, not as a scandal but as a lesson in humility. Professors used it to spark discussions about power, perception, and the quiet courage it takes to admit you were wrong. And in homes across the country, parents used it to teach their kids a simple truth. When someone tells you who they are, believe them, unless you have a real reason not to, and even then, treat them like a person. The airport itself never put up a plaque or held a ceremony. But if you knew where to look, you could see the change in the way staff greeted travelers, in the extra second they took to listen, in the way they handled confusion with patience instead of suspicion. It wasn't about one family. It was about all of us, because the truth is we've all been on both sides of that moment, either the one who was doubted or the one who doubted without meaning to. And the only way forward is to choose again and again to lead with kindness. Sasha never sought recognition for how she handled that day. She didn't write a book or give a TED Talk. She just lived her life, with grace, with quiet strength, and with the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm when the world treats you unfairly. And her father? He never used the moment to score political points or fuel outrage. He used it to remind people that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. Responsibility to listen, to question your own assumptions, to show up for others even when it's inconvenient. In the end, the story wasn't really about an airport or a boarding pass or even a famous last name. It was about what happens when we choose to see each other, not as roles, not as risks, but as human beings trying to get where we need to go, and that's a lesson worth carrying. No matter which gate you're walking through,